What is up, everybody? Welcome to Dangerous Ideas. I'm the most censored comedian in America, Lee Camp. Thank you for making it today. I love this. I love hanging out with you guys on a near daily basis. And here's the thing, thanks to all the suppression and thanks to the fact that they don't really tell most people that I'm even alive here, it means it's a very elite club. We get a very elite group of people here right now, which is what makes this so awesome. It's just the cool folks. They're not going to show this to anyone. So you got to be cool enough to be here. That's a very elite club right there. I'm going to get into police abusing, destroying, covering up DNA evidence in order to just keep as many convictions as they can, but also execute innocent people. This is an important topic, and we're going to start off. I'll also later get into some updates on Israel and their G side, as we're now calling it, because I know it sounds like a rap group, but apparently, if you say the actual word, then you will be suppressed by YouTube, as I am. So they're just G side. You can't make a good G with your fingers. So G side, yeah. The G side that Israel's been involved in. More on that coming up later. But let's start off with DNA evidence. And we're going to start off with a very specific case because this guy could lose his life quite soon. This is coming to you from The Intercept, and their article about it says his best chance to get off of death row was the DNA on the murder weapon, but prosecutors just accidentally screwed it up. Man, if only we had been able to preserve that DNA evidence. So here's the deal. Dan, here's the crime. Here's the moment. Put yourself there. 1998. Dan Pekas comes home from work August 11th, 1998, to find his wife murdered. Despite a wealth of physical evidence found at the scene, including the knife, the investigation quickly stalled. So they got knife, they got all kinds of physical evidence, and they're just like, we have no idea who did this. Well, guess what? Pekas then offers $10,000 for information leading to a conviction. And to most people, that is a shit ton of money. So all of a sudden, you have people start going, oh, yeah, I just remembered. I know who did it. And I know who did it. And I know who did it. And so a jailhouse informant comes forward claiming his former cellmate, Marcellus Williams, confessed to the crime. Police later found a second informant, although you'll notice police, when they need to convict someone, suddenly it takes a few weeks, and then suddenly some second person comes forward. Why is that? Well, often it's because they're threatening the person, they're offering to get them out of prison, they've got other techniques to get people to falsely point the finger at people who are innocent. Anyway, a second police informant comes forward, a former girlfriend of Williams, who also claimed he confessed to the murder. Though their stories, the two people who pointed at Marcellus Williams, their stories do not line up and change over time regularly. Despite the informant's accounts, none of the physical evidence at the scene tied Williams to the killing. Their testimony, however, was enough to secure a conviction for Williams. So police successfully get him convicted. Well, where does the DNA come in? Well, before the 2001 trial, so the murder happened in 1998, before the 2001 trial, the St. Louis County Assistant Prosecuting Attorney Keith Larner decided that the butcher knife that was used to kill Felicia Pekas was worthless as a piece of evidence, right? It's just the murder weapon. We don't need to worry about it anymore. So he and his team then go on to handle the weapon regularly, to just contaminate it with all kinds of DNA. They would have it at parties, gatherings, they walk up to friends. It's a nice icebreaker. Hey, you want to touch a knife that was used to kill someone? And they laugh and they laugh and they share it and they pass it around and whatever else they did with it. They basically decided that there was no reason to preserve it as the murder weapon any longer. So the knife is handled by all kinds of people. It's been analyzed for fingerprints, but none were found before. But this is before he decided he could just handle it however he wanted. And the blood on the blade matched Pica's. Larner said he saw no problem with his repeated handling of the weapon without gloves. And, it was really no problem until they get to the trial. And now there's a hearing coming up, or has just a hearing that has just happened. Fast forward to now. But so in this hearing, the retired prosecutor, now retired, was defending his actions back in 2001. Williams, who is scheduled for execution in September, maintains his innocence. Until last week, the knife was central to proving his claim. Williams sought testing of the weapon, DNA testing, perhaps certain types of DNA testing that were not available as easily in 2001. But the judge denied his request and DNA testing that was done in 2016 excluded Williams from handling the weapon. So they did the testing in 2016. They found out that the guy that they are going to execute, none of his DNA is on the weapon. There's nothing connecting him to this murder weapon. However, there was DNA of the victim, and there was DNA of, guess what? An unknown man, an unknown male DNA, which is almost definitely the murderer. But last week, a new round of analysis confirmed that Williams' genetic material was not on the knife, but that the third person, or the second person that's on the knife, the unknown male, could be any of the people that contaminated it. And this is not uncommon with police, where when they're faced with DNA being used to prove them wrong, the DNA is kept out of the trial. The DNA is contaminated. The DNA is lost. Often it's not just DNA, but other evidence might get lost. And this shows how corrupt. I mean, you got to remember, we live in the largest prison state in the world, in the United States, with well over 2 million people locked up on a daily basis. And this is part of it. It's the fact that cops, investigators, the prosecutors as well, they want to convict someone. They don't want it to ever be proven that they got it wrong. They don't, if they, only found one person and they don't have a lot of proof on them, they just force it anyway because they want to get someone and they want to prove that they were able to catch this murderer. And I'm going to give more examples in just a minute, but so now the judge, Hilton, is tasked with determining, this is happening right now, whose version of the truth and of the constitutional error is correct. His decision on whether Williams's conviction should be overturned is due September 13th, just 2 weeks before Williams is slated to be executed. This is, of course, horrifying and could mean another innocent person executed. I have often railed against the death penalty in general, although that's not really what this segment is about. But I have railed against the death penalty. For one thing, they say on average 4% of those executed are definitely innocent, 100% innocent. Then you have all the people that just might be innocent. The 4% have been proven innocent, but that are executed. So you're executing innocent people regularly. But then there's just so many other reasons the death penalty is just insane, which I won't go through all of them now because I've done it many times in the past. But and by the way, the Democratic Party just removed opposition to the death penalty from their platform. They removed it. This is like when Google took "Don't Be Evil" out of their that was their mission statement when they started, but they quietly removed it several years ago. Maybe just, okay, let's be a little evil. So they took out "Don't Be Evil." Well, the DNC has removed their opposition to the death penalty. But so Marcellus, what's his name? Marcellus Williams. I was about to say Marcellus Wallace, like from Pulp Fiction. Marcellus Williams, his life hangs in the balance right now as to whether they throw out his conviction because the weapon has been contaminated. So this type of thing regularly happens where I'd say what happens the most is that the prosecutors successfully manage to get DNA evidence kept out of a trial in order to have a better chance at convicting someone who's innocent. And I have a bit of a personal experience with that because my sister-in-law was pro bono representing someone, a young man in New York. This is years ago, who was uh, being prosecuted. He was on trial for murder, for murdering someone, and the DNA on the weapon did not match him. Now, when he had his first trial, was a mistrial, which meant they kept him in prison. So he'd been in prison for 3 years for a murder he didn't commit. And then he was up for this is the next trial where they're again, New York prosecutors again trying to convict him for a murder he didn't commit. And now they have more access to DNA and they find out that the DNA shows that he is not better DNA testing. Find out DNA proves he's not a match to the DNA on the weapon. But the prosecutor successfully gets that kept out of the retrial so that the jury never knows that the DNA has proven him innocent. And this happens like regularly. I don't know how they managed to argue that that's not important, that shouldn't be shown to a jury, but somehow these shit-stained prosecutors succeed in getting it kept out. And then, just because it's an interesting story, I'll tell you the rest of it real quick. I went to watch her argue one day. I think I only went one day. It just happened to be the day that they asked the only eyewitness to the murder. They ask who wasn't the murderer. They ask him to pick in a photo who killed his nephew, and he's only given 3 photos. And he's obviously supposed to pick the guy that's sitting in the courtroom, the guy that they're trying to prosecute for this. He accidentally, because he probably either just accidentally got it wrong or was pointing at the actual murderer. But either way, he accidentally points to not accidentally. He points to the wrong person because the guy they're prosecuting is innocent. So it's actually not an accident, but it looked bad. It was an accident for the prosecutor. So he points to the person who's not in the courtroom, and the whole place gasps because this is the whole trial pivots on this eyewitness, and he points to the wrong photo, and all the lawyers jump up, and then the defense lawyers ask him to again pick out who he says murdered his nephew. He again points to someone who's not in the courtroom, and so basically, then there's a discussion about whether the trial's over and the guy should be freed, and the guy who's on trial for it. And he walked out of the courthouse that day a free man for the first time in 3 years. And then they find out like 2 days later that the New York prosecutor's attorney general or assistant attorney general or something is going to continue to prosecute him. So the DNA proves him innocent. The only eyewitness says it's not him. And they want to continue to prosecute him because they just want to win. These are awful, awful human beings. It is tough to really come up with where they find they're very smart people, awful human beings who just want to lock people up for things. It doesn't matter whether they're innocent or not. And anyway, they continue to prosecute. The trial goes on. Luckily, the jury, which doesn't, some of them may not have nearly the IQ or the bar results that this asshole prosecutor has, but they have a moral core. You see the difference? And the jury decides that the man is innocent. So he does get off. But it's just amazing that they decided to continue prosecuting him. And that's what's going on right here in the Marcellus Williams case. I'm trying to figure out what. Sorry, 1 second. Why is it such a secret? Well, anyway, maybe someone else can read up. I can't find out what state this is happening in. Missouri, thank you. Okay. It seemed like it was a secret which state it was happening. It's in Missouri. Big surprise. They love executing people in Missouri. But, okay. So the same thing happening in Marcellus Williams right now is it seems that there's increasing evidence that it wasn't him that did it, and yet they just want to get him executed. They just want to say, "Oh, we got another conviction, we got another execution." So I've given you two examples, and here's another example of DNA proving how wrong the the authorities, whether it's the cops or the FBI or whatever, are. But lots of times they don't want you to find out about the DNA that proves them wrong. So here's in the example of hair microscopy, which forensic, the FBI has said, oh, it's this forensic science, and it's absolutely, you can just look at someone's hair and find out who it is, with a 99% reliability or certainty or whatever. And as with most forensic science, not with DNA is an actual, scientifically proven, but with most forensic science, like teeth mark science, quote unquote, arson science, quote unquote, there's more and more evidence that it's all bullshit. It's all just used. There is no science to it. It's just wrong. And they use it to convict people that the cops want to convict, whether they're innocent or not. So another one of those, along with arson and also blood spatter, is another one that's just complete bullshit. So along with those is hair microscopy, where they find a hair and they don't find fingerprints. They just find a hair, and then they look at that hair in a microscope and they go, "Oh yeah, that's him. Yeah, I can tell. His hair looks just like that hair. Oh yes, it does." That's exactly how the FBI sounds when they're doing this shit. And so the FBI was forced. This is back in 2016. Was forced to admit that like hair microscopy is utter bullshit. In 2015, the U.S. Department of Justice and the FBI stunned the criminal justice community by acknowledging that in the 2-decade period before 2000, nearly every examiner in the FBI's microscopic hair comparison unit, they had their own unit, gave flawed testimony in criminal cases. Basically, they had to admit that every single FBI hair analyzer, God, can you imagine how sick do you have to be to decide you're going to devote your life to just looking at pubes through a microscope and getting it wrong, and then going in front of a court and telling them you always get it right? Look, I know my pubes. I got to tell you, there's one guy who knows his pubes. It's this guy. It's this guy. Microscopic hair comparison analysis, or hair microscopy as it's commonly called, became a major source of controversy following DNA exonerations in Washington, D.C. from 2009 to 2012. All three defendants were convicted based on FBI hair microscopy evidence that DNA testing later proved wrong. It turned out that hair microscopy, a so-called forensic science that the FBI has used in approximately 21,000 cases, is not really science at all. And the reason that you have people convicted for the hair and then later the DNA proves them innocent is because DNA evidence, they're getting better and better at analyzing it, but they're getting better and better at analyzing it with a very small amount of DNA. So for a long time, DNA evidence didn't exist at all. Then it became, you could do it if you had a drop of blood or something. And now we're down to like microscopic DNA they can now match to someone. Nevertheless, FBI experts repeatedly testified improperly, applying probabilities to include someone as the source of the hair and possibly contributing to hundreds of wrongful convictions for violent crimes dating back to the 1970s. Even more shocking, some jurisdictions continue to use hair microscopy where mitochondrial DNA testing, a more reliable test for hair comparisons, is deemed too expensive, too time-consuming, or is otherwise unavailable. Did you catch that part? Rather than spend the money to actually look at the DNA and actually prove whether the guy did it or not and prove whether he's innocent or not, they're like, it's kind of costly. It's kind of costly. So we're just going to take out the old the old magnifying glass and stare at his pube, and then we'll decide. Uh, it's utterly insane. But of course, it's the real reason is they don't want to prove that this guy didn't do it. It is almost always a guy that this guy didn't do it, and so they just go, "Oh yeah, look at that there, he did it," and that's the end of it. Um, Reviews of 342 defendants' cases have been completed, but about 1,200 cases remain, including 700 in which police or prosecutors have not responded to requests for trial transcripts or other information. So this gets back to the fact that the police, the FBI, other authority prosecutors, they don't even want to give them the information so that they can overturn these things. If you wanted innocent people out of prison, you would be like, take it all. Here's all the information, please. If we accidentally imprison an innocent man, then get it overturned. Absolutely. That's what you would do if you had like a scent of ethics in your body, to mix my metaphor. I don't know how many cents we have in our body, but if you had a single percentage of ethics in your body, you would be like, absolutely, I don't want innocent people in prison. But that's not what they do. And you see this again and again and again. So let's do another example. This one, I don't know how many of you listen to the podcast Bone Valley. I just happened to stumble across it a few weeks ago. But it follows the case of Leo Schofield, who is an innocent man. He was just recently, this is after years of, the podcast went for 3 years and ended, not long ago. And he was just, Leo Schofield was just freed from a Florida prison. Yay, exciting, right? But that's after serving 35 years as an innocent man in prison for the murder of his wife. So not only do you have your wife murdered, not only do you get locked up in prison for 35 years, but you have everyone in your orbit, your world, everyone you'd ever known thinking you're a murderer. I mean, it is just the most horrific torture. And this guy was innocent behind bars for 35 years. But here's something else to know about this case. He was not released because they go, oh, he's an innocent man. And by the way, I'll probably repeat this in a second, but another man confessed to murdering his wife. And the evidence all added up to the other man murdering his wife. And there was no physical evidence that Leo Schofield had murdered his wife back in 1986, 1989. And so, but that was not why he was released out of prison. He was released out of prison because he got paroled after 35 years. So they did not say, oh my God, we got the wrong guy. This other guy confessed. The evidence all shows it was this other guy. The other guy's convicted of other murders, so he is a known murderer. Wow, we got the wrong guy. No, none of that happened. They fought to keep him in prison until he was finally paroled this last April. Convicted murderer Leo Schofield has been released from prison after spending the last 35 years behind bars. Schofield was convicted of murdering his wife in 1989, always claimed he was innocent. His wife, 18-year-old Michelle Schofield, was found stabbed to death in Polk County, Florida, 2 years earlier. So the 89 trial, 87 was the murder. No physical evidence linked Schofield to the murder, according to the Innocence Project of Florida. He claimed another inmate already serving a life sentence for a different Polk County murder killed his wife. And it wasn't just that he claimed another guy did it. The other guy had confessed and confessed and confessed. He had written letters to the courts and the prosecutors saying, I'm the one that killed Michelle Schofield. It wasn't even a question. The actual murderer, Jeremy Scott, confessed to killing Michelle during an interview with the Bone Valley podcast, but he also had confessed in letters before that, letters to the prosecutor. And they kept fighting to keep this guy in prison because that's what they do. That's what cops do. That's what prosecutors do. It's just crazy how much they're dying to keep innocent people in prison. And to get back to DNA for a second, there was another murder around the same time of a taxi cab driver that Jeremy Scott also confessed to murdering this cab driver. And there was evidence in that cab that could have linked, they couldn't have tested it, I don't think, in 1989, but they could test it now or 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and probably linked Jeremy Scott to the baseball cap that was left in the cab after the murder. So if they'd done other DNA testing on a lot of this evidence, they could have freed Leo Schofield years ago. But they don't. Instead, they lost the baseball cap. Instead, they lose the evidence or contaminate it in the case of the knife that I mentioned earlier. And so this is how DNA evidence that can be used to free people can also be covered up or contaminated or ruined. And that seems to be like the standard operating procedure for a lot of police departments across this country, just to make sure that once they've convicted someone, they don't get out, because it looks bad, right? It looks bad when they get out. And here is some stats from the Innocence Project on DNA exonerations in the United States. So this only goes up to 2020 because apparently Innocence Project stopped keeping track of exactly this stat. They say they switched to keeping stats about Innocence Project's successes, and I don't know. But anyway, that's why it ends in 2020. So there's been many more than this, but this is how many DNA exonerations there were up to 2020. 375 DNA exonerees to date in 2020. Meaning these are all people that were convicted, many of them facing death, facing execution, many of them life in prison. And already you have 375 across the country that were freed based on better DNA testing. 1989 was when the first DNA exoneration took place. 37 states have had exonerations. 5,284. That's the number of years that have been served by innocent people that were exonerated by DNA. 21 of the 375 people served time on death row. 69% of those convicted, of these innocent people convicted, involved eyewitness misidentification. And this is another important thing of just how wrong eyewitness testimony can be. People, they see a shady figure in the night, and then once they're told this is the guy who we think did it, their imagination shifts the shady figure they saw to be the guy that they're told likely did it. And I mean, that's one of the biggest things that happens. Obviously, there's other ways that eyewitness testimony is wrong, but like in the Schofield case, one of the only things tying him to this supposed murder is around the time that his wife goes missing. A neighbor says she saw him carrying a heavy thing to his car. Well, the heavy thing he was carrying was an amp because he was a rock musician at the time. Now, if she actually had not wanted to make him the murderer in her mind's eye, she would know that an amp looks nothing like a dead body. An amp, like, she could have said, oh, he had a heavy box. But, like, she thinks that, most people do not chop people up and put them in boxes. That is kind of not common. But instead, she just said it's a heavy object. And then that was used in court to say, oh, he carried something heavy to the car. 43% involved misapplication of forensic science, because forensic science is largely bullshit. 29% involved false confessions. And most of why you wonder, why would people confess to something they didn't do? Well, most of the time they feel crazy pressure, or they're offered some kind of plea deal and they feel it's the only way out. It's like, you're innocent, we're going to put you to death, but if you plead guilty, then you'll stay alive, those kind of things. But half of all the false confessions were 21 years old or younger. And in fact, 31% were 18 years old and younger. So young people are more easily pressured by cops to say, oh, we know you did it and things like that. And then pressure them to, like, we're going to let you go if you just say you did it. And then they, I guess, say they did it. 9% of the false confessions had mental health or mental capacity issues known at the trial. So you get a lot of false confessions. 30% of all those had false confessions. I mean, that is crazy. But again, that is police being this horrible force that just decide, oh, we know this guy did it, so we're just going to scream at him in a room for hours and hours and hours on end until he thinks that the best thing to do is just admit it. It's crazy. I was accused of something I didn't do by a cop. Now, I don't know if I would put it up there with murder, but I was accused by a cop of not wearing my seatbelt. And, not a fan. And I guess by the end of it, I kind of gave a false confession. Because I was like 20 years old or something, and I was totally speeding. I was going like, 80 and a 65 or something. And he pulls me over, and I've got my seatbelt on, and I just leave it on. I don't bother to take it off. And he comes up to the window and he says, you were speeding, son. And I'm like, yeah, I was going too fast. And then he goes, why weren't you wearing your seatbelt? And I go, oh, no, I am wearing it. It's right here. And I'd like show him that I've got my seatbelt on. And he goes, no, why weren't you wearing your seatbelt when I pulled you over? And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I had my seatbelt on. And he just kept saying it. It was like, son, we know. And he just kept saying, why weren't you wearing your seatbelt? You weren't wearing your seatbelt. And like, he was getting angrier and angrier. And I realized, like, I guess I have to say I wasn't wearing my seatbelt to get this guy to leave me the fuck alone. Like, it was so bizarre, but it's just cops being absolute belligerent assholes and thinking they know everything. And anyway, so eventually I didn't say I wasn't, but I just go, okay. And then he goes, well, I'll just give you the ticket for the speeding. And I'm like, oh, thanks for the thing I actually did as opposed to the thing I didn't do. But but yeah, this is just one of so many ways that our policing system is just epically fucked. And it's how you end up with the largest prison state in the world. I have torn apart policing from about 100 different angles, so I'm not going to yet again go through the types of people that they hire to be cops and what they're expected to do and things like that. But let's hope that Marcellus Williams, in these 3 weeks before they're going to execute him, which makes the state murderers, which actually then they are guilty of the thing they're accusing him of that he's innocent of. Let's hope that this judge actually throws it out or it gives him a new trial or whatever. But I mean, I guess it's tough to have a new trial when you've contaminated all the evidence, which is what they seem to do when they don't want a new trial to be successful. Okay, let's get to some updates on Israel, but also protests against Israel and their G-side. Hey, everybody, please, if you feel like you're getting 38 cents worth out of this episode, I hope you will join up at leecamp.net. Scroll down to become a subscriber. Also, if you can also become a member at patreon.com/leecamp if you prefer. I know some people are like, this locals thing, it's a new system, and I don't want to learn the new systems. So, yes, if you prefer patreon.com/leecamp, you can do it there, and you make this show possible. I can't stress that enough. While all my fellow YouTubers are being arrested or indicted by the Justice Department, your help means a lot. I don't mean all my fellow YouTubers. I mean all my fellow YouTubers who are talking about important shit to some degree or another. Although some of them that have been indicted, I absolutely disagree with them on just about everything. Anyway, one last thing about locals. I did put a poll up there. just yesterday, and anybody can participate in this poll. So you could actually go over and become a free member and be a part of the poll. And I'm basically just asking you guys what you want to see more of. I probably should add some more choices to it, but it's basically like listing the things that I already do, but I can do more or less of various types. And it's, whether you want to see more in-depth analysis of a single topic, like I just did on DNA evidence and policing, or in-depth tearing apart of interviews and by politicians and celebrities, activist events and protests, interviews with awesome humans, etc. So right now, interviews with important humans is winning. You guys seem to like my interviews, which is cool. I'm glad you do. And second place is in-depth analysis of a single topic. But those are the type of polls you can be a part of over on my Liberals page. Even if you aren't a paying member, often you can join into those polls. So go to leecamp.net. And if you want to become a free member, click become a member. If you want to become a subscriber, scroll down to become a subscriber. And yeah, so you can be a part of that as well. Thank you, Cosmic Beat, for joining up on YouTube. Absolute, man. Thank you. Solidarity. All right, so Israel, it feels like it was only a matter of time before this happened, but Israel has shot an American dead in cold blood. U.S. citizen shot dead by Israeli troops during West Bank protest. And it actually happened, I think, a month ago, but it's gotten very little news coverage. There was a time where the U.S. government would care and be upset and be like, you killed an American? This is outrageous. But with Israel, apparently, you can just totally kill anyone you want. Israeli forces shot and killed a female international activist during an anti-occupation protest in the town of Beta near Nablus in the West Bank. 26-year-old Asenur Ezgi Aigi. I definitely pronounced that totally right. Here's the thing, is even if you pronounce your name differently, how I pronounce it, that's the right way. See? Because I'm just, anything I do is right. It's kind of like Donald Trump. Anything I do is just like the best, bigly the best. So just totally, that's how you pronounce it now. If you've been pronouncing it differently, even if it's you got to change now. A U.S. citizen of Turkish descent died on Friday after being shot in the head with live ammunition by Israeli forces. Aigi was participating alongside local Palestinians in the weekly protest against settlement expansion. Local sources told the media that the confrontation erupted when Israeli forces violently suppressed the Friday protest, firing live ammunition, stun grenades, and tear gas at demonstrators. And it shows the amount of just how unaccountable, the amount of impunity that Israel operates under. They're just completely unaccountable. They are murdering protesters, but they're murdering even American citizens. Now, granted, when they go up and they murder people, they probably don't look into where they're from. They just assume anyone who's protesting Israel is fine to be murdered. Somebody's in the chat, Robert in the chat's mentioning Rachel Corrie. Yeah, she was an American killed by Israel as well a while back. But it's getting worse in the West Bank. They're e-cleansing. It's G-side and e-cleansing. Their e-cleansing of the West Bank is getting worse and worse, as I covered just the other day. Might have been yesterday. Democracy Now! And others are reporting that Israel's G-side in Gaza continues as a new leak details how Netanyahu torpedoed ceasefire deals. Newly published documents show how Netanyahu and Israeli negotiators purposefully prolonged Israel's assault on Gaza by making new demands during ceasefire talks. The documents published by an Israeli newspaper also reveal that 3 of the 6 hostages that were just found dead, our mainstream media is talking a lot about them, they were just found dead in Gaza last weekend, were due to be released under that ceasefire agreement that was drafted in May. And for those of you who are really following the play-by-play of these ceasefire negotiations, I mean, I've kind of stopped following it because I don't feel any of them are legitimate. someone's asking for the link, so I'm throwing it into the comment section. But in the ceasefire negotiations, it's so clear that Israel is saying they're going to do things, and then when the deal gets basically agreed upon, they add new things in, and to make sure that it just never there is no ceasefire, because they don't want a ceasefire. They want a G-side. They want cleansing, electronic cleansing. They want everybody to fix their computers. But these leaked documents show, like, they actually show the proof. I mean, I guess a lot of people assume this, but they actually show the proof that Netanyahu and others have been torpedoing these ceasefire deals. I will bring you some positive news, which is that as colleges across the United States are coming back into session, as universities are coming back into session, the protests are beginning again. They are not stopping, which is one of the best things I've heard in a while, that the energy is still there to stop this G-side. Here is footage from this is Columbia students right there protesting at Columbia as classes begin again, and I hope that those just keep growing. I hope that they keep fighting, because these schools should not be let off the hook. I mean, these schools have been crushing freedom of speech. They've been crushing dissent. They've been crushing those people who dare say there shouldn't be a G-side, who say that maybe 40,000 people murdered by Israel, if you don't count famine and disease. 40,000, over 40,000 people, 70% of them women and children. Maybe that should upset us. Maybe that should be enough to get us out there and angry. And yet these schools have, of course, gone after them in so many ways. Just the other day, I covered how NYU is passing something saying that supporting Zionism, so supporting an oppressive apartheid regime, is equivalent as protected speech, or protected identity. Sorry, protected identity. It's equivalent to being black or gay, which is insane. And it's the only political stance that has been added to NYU's list of protected identities. So apparently supporting G-side is the same as being black, which that is surprising. I just had no idea. I didn't know that those two are so identical. Let's see. Well, so there's other. Let's see. That was Columbia. There's others. Oh, Georgetown was also. I saw a video of Georgetown protesting today or yesterday as their classes restart. I'm sure it's happening across college campuses. And then they're also firing teachers that have protested with the students. Northwestern has suspended a journalism professor, Stephen Thrasher, after being seen at Gaza solidarity protests, because apparently you cannot teach and also be opposed to e-cleansing, and also be opposed to murdering thousands of innocent people. Those two things they're polar opposites. You cannot, that Venn diagram does not overlap. Teaching professor opposed to murder of tens of thousands of innocent people, no overlap. Cannot do both. You got to pick one. Either you're a professor or you're opposed to mass murder. Well, sadly, absolutely polar opposites. Okay, I'm going to switch gears here again for another important topic, which I feel like is something that a lot of people wonder about. So, I cover China fairly often, as it's become one of the top enemies of U.S. hegemony. The U.S. empire goes after China regularly. And of course, China is one of the main reasons that BRICS has formed, that we're seeing the rift in the global economic hegemony, that we're seeing many African nations able to stand up and fight back against post-colonial world, and China's hugely important. So a lot of people are wondering, like, what kind of political system do they have in China? It's, partially communist, it's partially capitalist, it's and is there any democracy in China? And so a geopolitical economy report has done a great article on this. By the way, before I get into that, what was the other thing I wanted to say? If you want to throw in super chat, I will try and get all those on the screen. I should have said that at the beginning of the show instead of waiting until towards the end of the show. But whatever. I'm doing my best here, all right? But here's the article written by Simon Turner. It says, U.S. or China, which is truly democratic? American oligarchy versus Chinese consultative democracy. And most of you don't need to be really reminded that the U.S. has oligarchy. We have ruled by a tiny business elite. We don't really have democracy almost at all. We have it maybe on the state level to some degree, on city level. But if you're talking federally, the elections are all clearly and obviously bought. And the most important thing to know is that in very large studies, nothing gets through Congress. Nothing is passed through Congress that doesn't align with corporate interests, meaning the system is owned. The system has been captured at the federal level. So compare that to what China has. So from the article, it says a Western survey, the Edelman Trust Barometer, found China to be the country rated highest globally in terms of people's trust in their government. China has, in fact, held the top spot every year, but once since 2018, with a comprehensive trust index of 79 in 2024. The U.S. is down at a mere 46. So the U.S., I'm trying to see so the U.S. is like, well, I don't think they're rating every country, and I don't think like they're putting Nehru on here or anything. So what number, what it ranks wouldn't really matter. The point is the U.S. is much farther down. I mean, we're below Spain, Ireland, France, Colombia, Sweden. Anyway, the people of the U.S. are at a disadvantage, however, the article says. How can their trust in government be strong under a duopoly system that is most convincing when the population is most polarized? That the governments in such a system based on divide and conquer cannot reach China's approval rating is practically built in. And that's a great point. It's like the ruling elite, in order to continue to own our system, in order to continue to have a stranglehold on our system, they need us very divided. They need us not working with each other. And in order to do that, they have their they have the duopoly, and they say, oh, it's red or blue team. That's all you can talk about. That's it. You got to pick your team and go with it. You got to hate the other side. If anyone's on the other side, they are dead to you. And so when you do that, you have half the country or close to it that is going to inevitably hate whichever president's in office because that president's from the other team. It's a great, for the ruling elite, it's a great show. It's great theatrics. But in China, the elites and organized groups representing business interests are kept below, subordinated by the government. And this is a key difference, is the business elites do not run the country in China. The business elites may have some types of power, but it's not running the government. Whereas in the U.S., the business elites, big oil, big ag, big pharma, they run the government. Nothing is done outside of their interests. What Western critics call an authoritarian system, they call China authoritarian, right? And there's that great clip not that long ago of Biden in front of giving a speech, and he's asked whether President Xi is in China is a dictator, and he goes, yeah, he's a dictator. And you just see Anthony Blinken in the front row, like wincing, like he just been like poop was just thrown in his face, because he knows that despite the Cold War that the U.S. has created with China, the U.S. still wants to work with China on various things. We have a lot of corporations in China. Starbucks, China's their second biggest market. Apple, China's their second biggest market. So you have these massive US companies that still very much need China. And not to mention, of course, other things like the computer chips and everything that are made in China. But so that's why Blinken was wincing as Biden said, "Oh yeah, it's a dictator." Anyway, critics call an authoritarian system is actually a different form of democracy, run not on behalf of a wealthy minority, but rather in the interests of a great majority. Although China's former leader, Deng Xiaoping, did allow market forces into the country, starting with a reform and opening in 1978, he insisted that the state would control the markets. Deng said of markets, if they serve socialism, they're socialist. If they serve capitalism, they're capitalist. In the United States, however, politicians don't listen to the people. And why would they? How can the system be a representative democracy when a candidate can't win an election without a great deal of money? And that money generally has to come from some of the richest people in the country. And in the rare case that someone gets into Congress without the money coming from the richest people in the country, and there's a few select examples like Dennis Kucinich or Cynthia McKinney, then they are quickly drummed out. They are quickly booted out. Cory Bush, and I don't know how much of Jamal Bowman's money came from wealthy elites, but I do not think Cory Bush, much of her money did. And now they've both been beaten by the money. U.S. politicians know whom they need to please. As the academic study on U.S. oligarchy showed, in Washington's so-called representative democracy, the only ones truly represented are big business. So China has something called a Message Board for Leaders, MLB platform, that connects the general population to local and ministry level government officials. It launched in 2006, and it handled 2.3 million demands, concerns, and complaints. Another nationwide Chinese government initiative, the 12345 hotline, fields more than 50,000 contacts a day in Beijing via telephone, internet, and new media, addressing issues of everyday life. Over 85% of concerns are resolved. Now, when I first heard this, if you put it in an American filter, like if someone told me, hey, the city or the state is creating a 123 hotline where they'll help you with things, I would go, oh, I'm sure that'll be bullshit. I'm sure I'm sure they'll ignore it all. I mean, to give an example, just a standard example, Maryland, where I now live, I live in Baltimore, Maryland accidentally deducted my Maryland taxes twice from my bank account. They just stole the money twice. And I've been trying to contact them to get the money back, to get the second charge back. No one ever answers a phone. Emails are never returned. Zero response. So if someone were to tell me in the American filter, like if you put this in an American mindset that the government created a hotline to help you, I'd go, yeah, that doesn't mean anything. They're not doing it. They're not going to do anything with it. They're going to say, hey, we have a hotline that we never listened to. We play some great hold music there. I don't know. It's John Mayer all day long on the hold music. By the way, that's one of my pet peeves. If I could just go off a quick tangent, is the hold music is meant to get you to hang up. Does everyone understand that? The hold music is designed to get you to hang up. It is generally garbage. And I don't mean it's just bad, like music I don't like. I mean, it is like somehow it's all grainy and the audio is just like, and they're like, we live in a digital age. There's no reason that phone anything should be grainy, and like they play deteriorated audio somehow to make you hang up. You get that? It's designed to make you hang up. Anyway, but if you instead put this in a filter of a different government, instead you put this in a world where the government is somewhat accountable to the people, then in this case, of the 50,000 contacts a day, 85% of concerns are resolved. The U.S. wouldn't get anywhere near that. China has also created local legislative liaison stations where grassroots deputies discuss legislative drafts and collect suggestions from the public. There are 45 national and 6,500 provincial and municipal through trains that connect ordinary people to China's highest legislative office, the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress. Local legislative liaison stations serve as contact points and collection centers for public opinion on draft national legislation. From the launch of the offices in 2015 to 2023, there were 3,100 ideas on forming or revising national legislation were incorporated. Soon after he became the new president of China in 2013, Xi Jinping launched a crackdown on corruption. And of course, if you read U.S. articles about the crackdown on corruption, they call it a consolidating of his power. But, perhaps there's another way to look at it than the U.S. propaganda way. What? How could that be? Launched a crackdown on corruption. In this mass line campaign referred to as the thorough cleanup, they sought to address longstanding problems in the country, targeting the 4 forms of decadence: formalism, bureaucratism, hedonism, and extravagance. At a study session of provincial and ministerial level officials in 2022, Xi reprised the theme, saying all party members should always maintain close ties with the people and accept the criticism and oversight of the people. And those were no empty words. The anti-corruption campaign was very serious. Many people, including the vice mayor of the Shanxi province, were given a life sentence in prison for accepting 1 billion yuan, $160 million in bribes. Now, I'm opposed to a life sentence for, I think, anything, but better to go after corruption than not. In the U.S., we don't. In the U.S., we don't call them bribes. We just call them campaign contributions. It's not a bribe. It's a contribution. And the Supreme Court just decided that it's actually fine to bribe people, to bribe politicians, as long as you give the money to them afterwards. As long as you don't show up with the unmarked bag before they do the favor, before they hire your nephew for the construction job or whatever, before they do the thing, as long as you show up afterwards with the unmarked bag and you go, here's a reward for being awesome. As long as you do that, basically, the Supreme Court said, totally fine. As long as you bribe afterwards. Which, listen, here's the thing. If you're the Supreme Court and you're corrupt corporate shit shows like most of the Supreme Court, if you're going to say that bribes are basically like fine if they're afterward, why not just say bribes are fine? Like what? Who are you kidding? It's like being like, well, it's fine to murder someone as long as you felt kind of weird about it. Like this I mean, at that point, shouldn't you just say murder's legal? Like, after you murder someone, just go, oh man, what was I doing? As long as you do that, it's fine. Like, if they were to make that law, then just say murder's legal. You don't have to add any equivocating. Just, if you're going to say bribes are fine after the fact, then say they're fine. You know, the other reason the Supreme Court needed to do that, say bribes are fine afterwards, is that I don't know if probably every president, although I did hear that Truman didn't refuse to do it, but and he was a absolutely horror of a human being in other regards, but takes bribes after they're out of the presidency. They get done with the presidency and then they go and speak to Wall Street or whatever. And Obama got $400,000 for a single speech to Goldman Sachs after being president, so he didn't even have any power anymore. So why would they want to give him that much money if he doesn't have power anymore? Oh, because it's like an after bribe. You did the thing. Here's the money. Hillary Clinton, this is before she ran for president, gave speeches to Goldman Sachs and other banks, 3 speeches for $650,000. Just 3 speeches. And if you read the transcripts got leaked to the of her speeches, and it's nothing important. It's not like she's going, here's how we're going to get them. It's nothing that important. So, which brings up the question even more. Why give her that much money? What's a bribe? It's now that bribed Hillary Clinton, since she hadn't run for president yet, is actually more of a previous bribe, which is supposed to be illegal. But okay, back to this. It is almost impossible to imagine senior executives of large U.S. banks on Wall Street being arrested for corruption. In fact, they crashed the economy in 2008 only to be bailed out by the government. The government basically gave them $1 trillion for collapsing the economy. Instead, as the watchdog website Wall Street on Parade wrote, despite 5 felony counts, JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon is allowed to remain at the helm of his federally insured bank despite his presiding over one of the worst banking scandals in U.S. history. 5 felony counts. What were the 5 felony counts? DOJ's incestuous relationship with Jamie Dimon is captured in a graphic from a historic lawsuit. This is in 2024. They negotiated directly with Jamie Dimon because that's what they do. In the rare case that they go after someone like Jamie Dimon, they just negotiate with them, and here's how we'll do it. They gave complete civil immunity to JP Morgan Chase. So they gave him complete immunity for defrauding thousands in exchange for $13 billion via a contract that was negotiated, finalized in secret without any review or approval by a federal court. Complete immunity. That's what they do with the rich. They bring you back behind closed doors and they go, hey, we'll make it so nothing bad will ever happen to you. Just, pay some money. In 2023, the United States saw the second biggest banking collapse in its history as First Republic Bank crashed. Can you guess which bank was entrusted with more than $200 billion in First Republic assets after it crashed and realized an almost $3 billion profit on the deal? JP Morgan Chase. When debating the state of U.S. democracy, one cannot forget the brutal violence of the U.S. state. In the U.S., police have killed more than 1,000 North Americans annually for the last decade, with 1,247 victims in 2023. And as you've heard me mention many times, it's actually over double that. The Lancet Medical Journal showed that after reviewing thousands of deaths across the U.S. across many years, it is an undercount of about 55%. And so it's actually close to double that number of victims every year. So more like 2,400 people are murdered by our police every year. How many are murdered in China? Essentially none. This doesn't mean there aren't police in China. It doesn't mean that there isn't some forms of censorship in China. The U.S. has censorship as well. The perhaps most famous dissident of China in the world, maybe, Weiwei, the artist, a well-known Chinese dissident. He has said, and I covered it several months ago, that the U.S. has more censorship than China, or I don't know, his words might have been worse censorship, because they pretend they don't. They pretend you can say anything while I'm suppressed and my YouTube channel's deleted and all that shit. So in the West, they act like, oh, we have all this freedom of speech and everything. Meanwhile, Scott Ritter's house is raided and everything. Every 6.6 hours in 2023, there was a police killing in the United States. So I guess since it's double the number he said earlier, it's actually every 3.3 hours there's a killing by police. In China, there were none at all and haven't been in years. Thank you, Ann Way, for the donation. Yes, solidarity. Let's see. I'm going to wrap up here in a few minutes. The profound difference between China and the U.S. on the role of money in politics and how it skews democracy is stark. China does have elections, and for genuine representation, no lobbying or canvassing is allowed. Deputies to people's congresses at the township and county levels are elected by the Chinese people. These representatives, the deputies closest to the public, make up 94% of the national total and are entrusted with electing the higher level representatives. So, and there's a lot more to this article. Here's one summary paragraph. The truth about Chinese socialism as opposed to U.S. imperialism is that China's priority is domestic policy. Its focus is on its people, as epitomized by the mass line policy. From people to the people, democracy is fundamental. Whereas the U.S. has, outside of, local areas, has, and to some degree state, has essentially zero democracy. So, what was I going to say? Oh, yeah, the way that George Galloway described it when I saw him speak, and it wasn't his quote, so he's not the first to say it, is in the U.S., you can vote to change the parties at the top of the ticket, but you can't actually vote to change any policies. So the American people have no impact on policies. You just vote to change this party or that party. In China, you can't vote to change the party, but you can vote to change the policies. So you can actually have an impact on people's lives, whereas in the U.S., we essentially can't. And the stuff that is given to us, even the largest example of stuff that changed for the American people, is still a giveaway and in coordination with corporate America. One of the largest things that has changed for American people would be Obamacare, the Obamacare shift. But as many of you know, that was initially a Republican idea, and it was agreed upon by all of the big health insurance companies because it put millions upon millions of healthy young people paying in to the system. And so it actually was a giant giveaway to health insurance companies. And even with Obamacare, as many of you may have noticed, I almost lived in New York State a couple of years ago, ended up moving to Baltimore instead. But before I moved there, I was looking into healthcare and to get healthcare for, me and my family with one kid. The lowest, absolutely nothing lower, cheapest bullshit, not going to cover shit option that was available was $1,700 a month. So Obamacare is supposedly giving us health care, and under Obamacare, it's $1,700 a month. That was New York State. And it's just like, what? That's a second rent. Like, what the fuck are you supposed to do? It's absolutely insane. But anyway, I only brought that up to say that in the instances where you go, wow, they really did something for the American people, it's still a massive giveaway to corporate America. It is still anti-worker, anti-American, like your average American. Like the only people that can afford this society anymore are multi-millionaires. It's just utterly insane. Meanwhile, China, I hope some of you know this, over the past 30 years has taken 850 million people out of poverty. 850 million. Over 2 United States worths of people have been taken, almost 3 United States worth of people have been taken out of poverty by China, out of extreme poverty. Meanwhile, the U.S. is just increasing our poverty. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up there. I'd love for more of you to take part in the poll I got going on what you guys want to see. You can do that by what you guys want to see on my show in terms of the style and not necessarily, this one's not about the topics. I have done polls about what topics you want to see more of, but this one's more about, do you want more interviews? Do you want more in-depth topics? Do you want more play-by-play breaking news? And so if you want to be a part of that poll, you can do it without becoming a paying member. You just go over to leecamp.net and click become a member as opposed to become a subscriber. If you scroll down, you can become a subscriber. Become a subscriber. It's funny how if you say that 7 times fast, then you either have to say it with your lips like this, become a subscriber. Anyway. Thank you guys for joining me. I'll be back Monday. I do this 4 times a week, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, usually at 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific. You're not going to get the alert, so just show up. Just show up to the show. You can also watch it afterwards. But if you want to be if you want to see the live version, just show up to the show. Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific. What else? This is also a podcast. It's called Moment of Clarity on a lot of platforms. It's called The Lee Camp Show on other platforms. And yeah, that's what I got. Hope you guys have a great weeding. Great weeding. Hope you guys. Yes, Eleanor. Someone asked. Eleanor will be back next Friday, and I'm glad you asked that. Right as I'm like tripping over my words and sounding like a buffoon, you're like, can we just get someone that can pronounce things on here? Eleanor will be back next Friday. But what I was gonna say is have a great weekend and feel the energy of people fighting back. The protesters starting on the college campuses again. Yes. Thank you, Tone Millen. And keep fighting.